Welcome to West Film, your home base for movie recaps, reviews, ending breakdowns, and the little details you might have missed in your favorite films. If you love diving deep into great movies, do us a favor and hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. Now go grab some popcorn, settle in, and let's get into today's movie. The castle rises before them in staggering splendor, so grand that it makes their own home look shabby by comparison. Servants lead the family to their quarters and let them know they'll be formally presented to the royal family the next day. That night, Elodie steps out onto her balcony to take in the scenery. As she looks around, she notices another girl about her own age on a nearby balcony, but before she can get a good look, a maid hurries the girl away. Unable to sleep, Elodie spends the night sketching to settle her nerves. When she steps back outside for air, she notices something odd. The room where the girl had been is now pitch dark, and far off in the distance, torches are moving. It takes her a moment to realize what she's seeing. Someone is climbing the mountain in the dead of night. The following day, Elodie's family finally meets the royals. Queen Isabel wastes no time sending Elodie off to spend time with Prince Henry ahead of the wedding. Their first exchange is stiff and awkward, both of them clearly weighed down by the situation. But the tension eases as they keep talking. Henry proves to be warm and easygoing, and their conversation flows more naturally than either expected. For the first time, Elodie lets herself believe this arranged marriage might not be the disaster she feared. When Henry brings up how much he liked the drawings she'd included in her letters, she asks him about the torches she saw climbing the mountain the night before. He explains that Ori observes 3 ancient rites honoring its ancestors, and that's why the wedding was scheduled for this particular date. Inside the castle, Lord Beaufort wraps up a conversation with Queen Isabel about the marriage arrangement and walks away visibly shaken. His wife notices and tries to find out what's wrong, but he brushes her off, insisting everything is fine. Later, Lady Beaufort attempts to build some rapport with Queen Isabel, hoping the two families might grow closer before the wedding. Isabel meets her warmth with icy disdain, making it plain that this union has nothing to do with affection. It's simply a business arrangement. Ori needs a princess, and the Beaufort's failing land needs money. She then cruelly brings up Lady Beaufort's humble background, reminding her that she's the daughter of a rope maker and shouldn't forget it. Throughout the exchange, Isabel keeps mispronouncing Elodie's name, and when Lady Beaufort tries to correct her, the Queen simply ignores it and walks off. That evening, Lady Beaufort quietly pulls Elodie aside. Clearly unsettled, she tells her that something about this place feels deeply wrong and that the wedding shouldn't go ahead. But before she can say more, Lord Beaufort storms in and sends everyone to bed, cutting the conversation short. The next morning, the maids dress Elodie for the ceremony in an extravagant gown, handing her a dull dagger and a small perfume diffuser among her accessories. The wedding goes off without a hitch. Beautiful, elegant, seemingly perfect. Henry and Elodie exchange rings, kiss in front of the court, and she's crowned, officially joining Ori's royal family. Afterward, she says her goodbyes to her family and rides off with Henry, who tells her they're headed up the mountain to take part in the ancestral ceremony. They climb a steep, rocky staircase, and at the top, Elodie is unnerved by what greets her, a crowd in eerie golden masks, with Queen Isabel dressed almost like a nun. The Queen hands her a coin, telling her she'll be helping protect the kingdom, before the group moves inside. There, Isabel recounts the legend behind the ritual. How, generations ago, their ancestors arrived on the island to find it inhabited by the last dragon of its kind. Once the settlers arrived, the dragon attacked the village. The king led his soldiers against it, but the battle was a massacre. Every soldier died except the king himself. To buy peace and secure humans' place on the island, he was forced to hand over his 3 daughters to the beast. As Elodie listens, Unease creeps over her. The onlookers stare at her with a strange hunger, and the group crosses a narrow bridge suspended above a deep chasm, the danger beneath making the whole ritual feel even more menacing. Isabel explains that every generation renews the king's sacrifice. Then, without warning, she slices open both Henry's hand and Elodie's, pressing their wounds together and covering them with a ceremonial cloth. She announces to the gathered crowd that Elodie now carries royal blood. Still believing this is just an unusual custom, Elodie tosses her coin into the abyss. Assuming the ritual has concluded, Henry lifts her into his arms as if to carry her across the bridge, and for a brief moment, everything feels ordinary. Then his face changes, he murmurs an apology, and before she can process what's happening, he throws her into the chasm. Elodie screams as she falls, crashing through branches that slow her descent but leave her badly hurt, before finally landing in a muddy pool below and blacking out. When she wakes, bruised and covered in filth, she forces herself upright and screams for help, but the bridge above is empty. Everyone is gone. Her cries, though, do reach something. Deep within the cave, the dragon begins to stir. Grief, fear, and betrayal overwhelm her at first, but that despair curdles into rage. She tears the jewelry from her body, as if ripping away the illusion she'd been dressed in, and starts hunting for a way out. An attempt to climb back up fails when the rock gives way beneath her, injuring her further. That's when she spots jewelry scattered nearby, not hers. Pieces belonging to other girls. The horrifying truth dawns on her. She isn't the first bride thrown down here. The royal family has been sacrificing young women to the dragon for generations. A sound draws her toward a faint glow inside a cave opening, where she finds a small bird engulfed in flame. She tries to smother it with dirt, but it's too late. The bird dies. Moments later, a deafening roar shakes the cavern, and hundreds of burning birds explode out of the darkness, circling overhead before dropping to the ground one by one, their small bodies casting flickering light across the stone. Using them as an eerie light source, Elodie searches for a way out until she freezes. The dragon is coming. She ducks behind a stalagmite as the enormous creature enters the chamber and, to her horror, begins to speak. It says every generation of royal blood must pay its due, and it can smell that blood on her. Looking down at the cut on her hand, Elodie finally understands. The royals mixed her blood with Henry's to fool the dragon into thinking she's truly one of them. The dragon tells her to run, and she does, sprinting through the tunnels as flames chase her, diving into a passage just as fire roars past. She finds a small sheltered nook just in time. There, she discovers a burned body of the same girl she'd glimpsed on the balcony days earlier. Another sacrifice, she realizes. The dragon's approach forces her to keep moving. She tries to squeeze through a narrow gap, but her heavy gown snags. With the flames closing in, she frantically tears free by cutting away the crinoline beneath her dress and pushes deeper into the cave, hiding in a smaller chamber. She isn't fast enough. A fire catches her leg and burns her badly, and her scream draws the dragon closer, though the space is too tight for the beast to follow. Once the dragon retreats, Elodie remembers the blunt dagger tucked into her dress. She sharpens it against the rock until it can cut fabric, then tears a strip from her gown to bandage her burned leg. She catches a stray flame inside the perfume diffuser, turning it into a makeshift lantern, and uses the dim light to find a narrow passage. Her dress catches again. She yanks herself free, but the sudden release sends her tumbling down the tunnel. She loses her grip trying to catch herself, falls again, and the flame in her lantern dies. Still, she refuses to quit. Pulling herself up against the cave wall, she limps toward a distant glow. After a grueling trek, she emerges from the tunnel and stops just short of a cliff's edge. The light beckons from the far side of the gap. Elodie removes her wedding ring and hurls it into the darkness below, casting off everything that brought her here. She backs up, takes a breath, and leaps across, but the far ledge is slick, and she starts sliding. Her belt catches on a jagged rock, buying her a few precious seconds before it tears. She uses that window to jam the dagger into a crack and climb the rest of the way using it as an anchor. On the other side, she finds the source of the glow. Cave walls lined with small luminescent slugs. After confirming they don't bite, she tears off a puffy sleeve, gathers a handful of the creatures inside it, and fashions a new lantern. Pressing forward, she discovers an underground lake and drinks from it, only to spit the water out. It's tainted by the cave's plant life. Then she notices drips falling from ice melting above her and positions herself to catch what clean water she can. Suddenly the melting accelerates, and the light shining through turns red. She realizes with horror that the dragon is burning through the ice from above, and she barely escapes as the creature crashes into the cavern, chasing her once more, although it can't follow into the next tunnel, too narrow for its bulk. In this smaller chamber, Elodie finds a message scratched into the wall. It's safe here because the dragon can't reach inside. It's signed with the letter V. Scattered around are dresses left by other girls, and carved names cover the walls. Among them, she finds that V belonged to a girl named Victoria. She takes a moment to grieve for all the young women betrayed here before her, then removes the bandage from her leg to find the wound hasn't healed. Exhausted, she tries to rest, clutching her glowing lantern close. Sleep doesn't come easily. As she drifts off, she's visited by visions of the girls who came before her, ghostly figures reliving their fear and betrayal in the dark. Victoria appears, carving her name into the wall, then turns to Elodie and whispers that everything about the ceremony was a lie. Elodie jolts awake to find the glowing slugs crawling across her burned leg. She panics and starts brushing them off, only to discover the creatures have remarkable healing properties, and her wound closes almost instantly. She places one on her other major injury, murmuring an apology for doubting it. Renewed, Elodie studies the cavern and spots a map carved into the wall, a proof that at least one girl escaped before her. It shows 3 forks ahead, with the middle path marked as the way out. Guided by crystals and faint music, determined, she strips away the remaining bulk of her wedding dress, carves her own name into the wall as a mark of survival, and heads down the middle passage, ignoring the dragon's distant growls. Following the melody, she eventually reaches a wall studded with crystals shimmering under sunlight pouring in from above at the cave's exit. Nearby sits a crown marked with a V. Victoria made it this far. Knowing the crystals could tear her hands and feet, Elodie wraps them in fabric torn from her dress before using the crown as a foothold to climb. A crystal snaps beneath her, and she nearly falls, catching herself on the crown at the last second. With the dragon closing in, she scrambles to the cave's opening, only to find herself teetering on the edge of a sheer cliff. She collapses in exhausted tears, until the distant whinny of horses gives her hope. Riders are climbing the mountain. She shouts for help, but the dragon swoops in to block the exit. Elodie dives back just in time and spots another warning scratched into the rock. Not safe, signed by Victoria, whose body lies nearby. She didn't make it. The dragon readies another blast of fire but pauses, distracted by a man's voice calling Elodie's name. Lord Bfode has arrived with 2 knights and a guide to rescue her. Using their voices as cover, Elodie slips into a hidden passage and stumbles across a nest holding 3 dead baby dragons. The realization hits her hard. Queen Isabel lied. This dragon was never the last of her kind, nor the aggressor. A flashback reveals the old king slaughtering the dragonlings in their den, and the dragon's rampage was an act of revenge, sparing only the king so he'd suffer as she had. Ever since, the royal family has been offering blood-mixed brides disguised as princesses to appease her. Elodie spots her father and his men from hiding just as the dragon attacks again, snatching a knight mid-flight and dropping him to his death on the rocks below. The guide bolts, and the dragon crushes the second knight before turning on Lord Bfode. He steps forward, sword raised, claiming he's come to save his daughter but the dragon disarms him with a swipe of her tail and flings him aside. She demands he call for Elodie instead. He delivers a heartfelt apology and shouts for his daughter to stay hidden. Enraged, the dragon drives the claw through his chest. Elodie gasps in horror, accidentally making a sound, but a stirring guard draws the dragon's attention elsewhere. Seizing the moment, she rushes to her father's side, kisses his forehead in a silent goodbye, and grabs the rope he'd brought to climb her way out. Meanwhile, the dragon hunts down and kills the fleeing guide before resuming her pursuit of Elodie, who narrowly dodges the flames at the tunnel entrance. She mounts her father's horse, rides a short distance, then leaps off to hide beneath rocks, letting the horse continue on as a decoy. Believing she's escaped, the dragon burns the horse instead, then unleashes fire into the sky, summoning a violent storm as signal that the ancient bargain has been broken. Back at the castle, Queen Isabel watches in horror as her plan unravels. She orders her knights to seize Floria, hoping to hold Elodie's sister as leverage. Lady Bfode tries to shield the girl but is wounded by a blade before the soldiers force their way past. Once the fires die down, Elodie emerges from hiding to find Lady Bfode there, bleeding but alive as she'd ridden all the way up the mountain, badly injured, just to warn her. Learning that Floria has been taken transforms Elodie's fear into resolve. She vows to bring her sister home and rides back toward the castle. Floria, meanwhile, is dragged to the same bridge where Elodie was betrayed. Prince Henry, horrified at the thought of sacrificing a child, refuses to take part but Isabel doesn't care about his objections. She cuts the girl's hand herself, mixes their blood, and throws her into the chasm without hesitation. By the time Elodie reaches the bridge, the royal party is long gone. Below, Floria lies unconscious, kept alive by the dragon as bait, knowing Elodie will come for her. Undeterred, Elodie ties off her rope and descends into the cave once more, at this time with knowledge of its tunnels and dangers, moving far faster than before. She consults the carved map, locates the route to the dragon's lair, and arms herself with her father's sword before rigging a trap, a piece of armor suspended by a rope burning slowly over a flame, set to crash loudly once it gives way. The plan works as the noise lures the dragon out to investigate, giving Elodie the opening she needs to sneak in and wake Floria. But her sister's injured leg slows them down, and before they can get far, the dragon realizes she's been tricked and returns. With Floria hidden, Elodie faces the dragon alone, sword in hand, trying to explain that Queen Isabel deceived them both, that none of the sacrificed girls were ever true princesses. Blinded by centuries of grief, the dragon refuses to listen and prepares to breathe fire. Elodie rams her sword into its mouth to deflect the flames, but the impact knocks her off the ledge. She's burned along the way and crashes into a lake below. She swims free just as Floria tosses her another sword, but before she can recover, the dragon pins her down and drives a claw into her body. In desperation, Elodie stabs the creature in the eye with her dagger, and it throws her aside with a roar of pain. She grabs her sword and charges again. With one eye now blind, the dragon struggles to track her. Elodie manages to stab it in the chest, though the blow barely wounds it. When the dragon catches her once more, she stabs its paw to force it to release her. As the beast closes in again, she notices dust bouncing off a curved stalagmite nearby and realizes what she can do. She positions herself in front of it and dares the dragon to attack. Furious, it unleashes a blast of fire. Elodie dives clear just as the flames rebound off the stone and strike the dragon full force, finally bringing it down. Weakened, the dragon watches as Elodie approaches and shows it the scar on her hand, a proof of the deception, proof that innocent girls have died in place of true royal daughters for generations. The truth cuts through its rage. Exhausted, the dragon asks Elodie to end its life, but she refuses. unwilling to continue a cycle of vengeance that began with the old king's cruelty. Instead, she gathers the healing slugs and places them across its wounds, letting it recover. Back at the castle, another wedding is already underway, and the royals preparing to deceive a third generation's sacrifice as if nothing has changed. A coin rolls down the aisle, interrupting the ceremony. Calm but resolute, Elodie tells the bride to gather her family and flee while she still can, warning the assembled crowd of warriors that they should run too. Most don't take her seriously, only the servants heed the warning and hurry away. Then the dragon arrives, descending on the castle and unleashing fire across everyone gathered. Queen Isabel and the rest of the royal bloodline are consumed in the flames, finally ending the bargain that had cost so many lives. As chaos erupts, Henry simply closes his eyes and accepts what's coming, knowing he played his part in the suffering and deserves what follows. The castle collapses, destroyed by the very monster the royal family had used to hide their crimes. But Elodie walks away from the wreckage with her head held high, no longer a victim, but a survivor. Days later, Elodie, Floria, and a recovering Lady Bfo prepare to sail home aboard a ship loaded with gold and supplies for their struggling people. They agree to rule together and rebuild. Elodie's relationship with Lady Bfo has shifted to after everything her stepmother risked for Floria, Elodie finally calls her mother. On the journey home, the dragon appears in the sky alongside the ship. Elodie looks up, and the two share a quiet nod of mutual respect and no longer enemies. Both survivors of betrayal, both finally moving towards something new. Damsel is one of those Netflix fantasy films where you can practically summarize the whole pitch in a single sentence. A princess gets married, gets betrayed, gets tossed into a dragon's cave, and has to fight her way out with nobody coming to save her. It's a solid hook. Honestly, the film isn't trying to reinvent the genre or deliver some sprawling, generation-defining fantasy epic, but it's also not entirely forgettable streaming filler. There's a real idea at its core, a simple, but effective. Take the classic damsel in distress fairy tale, flip it on its head, cast Millie Bobby Brown in the lead, throw in a furious dragon, and let it all unfold as a survival thriller wrapped in castle politics and royal betrayal. That's Damsel at its best. What's strange is that the film is simultaneously stronger and weaker than its premise suggests. Stronger, because once the story drops into the cave, there are genuinely tense, grimy, and entertaining stretches as the dragon, the fire, a princess forced to figure out survival after realizing the entire kingdom above her treated her like a transaction in a wedding dress. Weaker, because so much of it is telegraphed well in advance. The movie carries that familiar Netflix sheen, a big cast, polished fantasy visuals, decent effects, a plot that moves along steadily, but there's also a slightly manufactured quality to it. Like it was engineered to be watchable rather than memorable. That's really the right mindset to bring into it. Don't expect a fantasy classic, deep world building, jaw-dropping twists, or the kind of emotional resonance that lingers after the credits roll. But if you want a darker fairy tale where Millie Bobby Brown spends 2 hours getting dragged through fire, ash, and betrayal by a dragon, there's enough here to hold your attention. It's familiar, uneven, occasionally clunky, sometimes visually striking, and sometimes clearly missing another pass on the script. But every so often the dragon shows up, or Brown nails a beat of panic and fury, and you remember why the concept had promise in the first place. Damsel isn't a masterpiece, but as a one-night fantasy adventure, let's see what Netflix cooked up with a princess and a dragon kind of watch. It gets the job done. At its core, Damsel opens like a fairly traditional fairy tale. We meet Princess Elodie, played by Millie Bobby Brown, whose home isn't some glittering, golden kingdom. It's cold, impoverished, and clearly running out of options. Her father, Lord Bfo, is struggling to keep his people afloat without the resources to do it. Then comes the offer from Moria, a wealthy island kingdom wants Elodie to marry Prince Henry, and on the surface, It sounds almost too good to be true. She gets a royal marriage, her family gets security, and her people get relief. At first, everything has that storybook shine. A struggling princess welcomed into a grander world, a handsome prince waiting for her, a powerful queen presiding over a kingdom that looks far more refined than anything she's known. But the film wastes little time hinting that something's off. Arya is beautiful, sure, but also unnervingly controlled and rehearsed. Queen Isabel smiles like someone who already knows how the story ends, and Prince Henry carries a soft, charming quality that feels less romantic the longer you sit with it. Elodie enters this marriage believing she's making a noble sacrifice. She just doesn't yet grasp what kind of sacrifice Arya actually has planned. And that's the real premise here. This isn't a love story about marrying into royalty. It's a trap dressed up as a wedding. The ceremony, the palace, the traditions, even the romance, all of it exists to deliver Elodie to something far darker. Once the fairy tale veneer cracks, Damsel becomes a survival story, a young woman thrown into a dragon's lair, abandoned by everyone who promised her safety, left to fight her way out of a nightmare she never agreed to. No prince, no rescuer, no last-minute cavalry, just one woman, a mountain of secrets, and a dragon that's been waiting. If there's one thing holding Damsel together, it's Millie Bobby Brown. She's in nearly every scene, and the film leans on her so heavily that it could have completely collapsed if she weren't up to the task. For the most part, she is. Brown brings genuine energy and physicality to the role, crawling through caves, scrambling over rocks, dodging fire, facing down a dragon, and selling every second of it. You believe her fear, exhaustion, anger, and desperation. Her performance isn't purely physical either. Even in quieter moments, her reactions to betrayal, discovery, and the cave's grim history give the character real weight. She's the reason the story stays engaging even when the writing itself falters, carrying not just the action but the film's emotional core. That said, her performance isn't flawless. Some viewers have found her yelling in the dragon scenes a bit much, occasionally bordering on distracting, and there are moments where thin material leaves her delivery feeling strained. But more often than not, she makes those scenes work where a lesser actor might have simply dragged the audience along. This role also reinforces why she's being taken seriously in the industry. Handling a physically demanding, emotionally taxing lead in a fantasy adventure is no small feat for an actor her age. She keeps the film grounded, keeps the tension alive, and makes you care about Elodie even when the supporting cast barely gets developed. In short, Brown is the heartbeat of Damsel. Without her, the cave sequences and dragon chase would likely feel flat. With her, they carry energy, humor, fear, and grit. She proves once again that she can carry a film, for better or worse. This one rides largely on her shoulders, and she mostly delivers. Millie Bobby Brown is probably the biggest point of debate around Damsel, which makes sense given how much the film depends on her. For some viewers, she's the reason it stays watchable at all. She has that restless young star screen presence that pushes through even fairly generic material. It's easy to see why Netflix keeps building projects around her. She knows how to hold a camera, how to look afraid without appearing helpless, how to make a survival scene feel physically real even when much of what she's reacting to wasn't actually there during filming. And in a movie like this, that matters enormously, because once she's in the cave, there's nowhere for the film to hide. It's mostly Brown crawling, bleeding, shouting, running, and outlasting a dragon. That's a lot to carry, and if you don't buy her performance, the whole thing falls apart quickly. Not everyone will buy it, though. Some will find her intense and convincing, others will find her performance a little loud, especially in the second half, which demands a lot of screaming and terrified reactions. There are moments where her delivery feels strained, not for lack of effort, but because the writing doesn't always give her clean emotional beats to work with. Sometimes she's carrying a scene on sheer effort, and you can feel it. If you're already a fan of Brown, Damsel likely gives you what you came for. She's front and center, fully committed, and gets to be bruised, furious, heroic, and vulnerable all at once. But if you're not already sold on her as a lead, this probably won't be the film that changes your mind. It shows off her strengths while also exposing some limitations. For me, she's good enough to carry the film, even when the film doesn't always carry her back. Brown gives Damsel more personality than the script arguably deserves. She isn't perfect here, but she's present, working, throwing herself into the role. And in a fantasy film this familiar, that level of commitment is often the difference between something forgettable and something with at least a pulse. Watching Damsel also makes you consider where Brown's career is headed. She isn't repeating herself. This is an actress who's gone from Stranger Things to Enola Holmes to Godzilla and now a full survival fantasy lead, pushing into different territory each time. Action, suspense, period costuming, demanding stunt work. Even when the scripts aren't perfect, the strategy is visible as she's carving out a niche as someone who can anchor big set pieces and carry a film without needing a co-star to prop her up, which is rare for someone her age. In Damsel, that investment pays off. The film leans heavily on her energy, and she delivers the kind of physical and emotional commitment that makes a shaky script at least watchable. There's a risk in continuing to choose these Netflix-style fantasy vehicles, though entertaining and visible, but not always deep or memorable. If she wants to avoid being typecast as the young heroine in peril, branching into darker or more demanding genres, crime, drama, mystery, horror, even sci-fi, could stretch her range further. Still, her choices feel deliberate, like she's building a portfolio with intention. That makes Damsel worth watching not just as a film, but as a marker of her growth. Even an uneven movie leaves you impressed by her willingness to shoulder a demanding lead role and take real risks. The supporting cast reads stronger on paper than it often plays on screen. Ray Winstone as Lord Fode, Angela Bassett as Lady Bfode, Robin Wright as Queen Isabel, Nick Robinson as Prince Henry, Brooke Carter as Elodie's younger sister, and Shohreh Aghdashloo voicing the dragon. That's a genuinely strong lineup, full of names that lend weight to a fantasy world that could otherwise feel artificial, and to be fair, they do help. Winstone brings a tired, weathered authority to Lord Bfode. It's clear early on that he isn't making decisions from comfort, but under real pressure, and he communicates that with minimal effort. A look, a hesitation, that natural gravity he carries. Robin Wright, meanwhile, knows exactly how to play cold royalty. Queen Isabel isn't written with much complexity, but Wright gives her a controlled, polished cruelty, a villain who doesn't need to raise her voice because the entire system already serves her. Bassett as the one you wish got more to do. Even a brief, cautious glance from her carries weight, and as Lady Bfode, she senses the danger before anyone else, making you want the film to give her a bigger role, though it mostly keeps her on the sidelines, which feels like a waste. Nick Robinson's Henry works fine for what's required, charming enough at first glance, but with an underlying weakness that suits the character. He's less a grand villain than a polished piece of a rotten machine. And Aghdashloo, without ever physically appearing on screen, makes one of the film's biggest impressions. Her voice alone gives the dragon history, anger, and menace, turning it into far more than a CGI threat. The supporting cast adds real class to Damsel. The problem is the script doesn't always return the favor. These actors show up ready to bring depth, but most of their characters are built more like functions than fully realized people. They elevate the film. You just wish the film elevated them back. Robin Wright as Queen Isabel is one of those casting choices that feels perfect in theory. She has exactly the icy, controlled presence that makes you believe she could run a kingdom with a smile while hiding a dagger behind her back. Every word measured, every gesture precise, always seeming 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. Elodie included. Wright isn't the issue here. She delivers exactly what's asked of her: a regal, calculating, quietly menacing. The problem is that the script doesn't give her much beyond that surface. Isabel is mostly defined by coldness, manipulation, and her role in the ritual, with little backstory or moments that reveal anything beyond the villain everyone's meant to fear. Even so, Wright makes her limited screen time count, resisting the urge to overplay the role and keeping it from tipping into caricature. Her presence alone makes the palace scenes crackle with tension, giving weight to a political machine that dresses cruelty in ceremony and calls it tradition. She's excellent at making Isabel feel dangerous and elegant, but the role itself is underwritten. You glimpse what could have been a truly compelling antagonist, though most of the time she functions more as a symbol of the corrupt system than a fully fleshed-out character. Still, she brings enough bite to keep the audience wary. And that tension matters in a story where the real danger is both political and literal. Angela Bassett's presence in Damsel should feel like a bigger deal than it ultimately does. She plays Lady Bobby, Elodie's stepmother, and initially the role has real promise. She's not the jealous, plotting stepmother of old fairy tales. If anything, she's one of the only adults in the story who seems fully awake to what's happening. She notices how suspiciously perfect Arya feels, reads Queen Isabel accurately, and understands something is deeply wrong with this marriage. Because it's Bassett, even her smallest moments carry weight. She doesn't need a big speech to make suspicion feel real. A look is enough. The way she watches the royal family, tries to pull Elodie back from the decision, and carries herself in palace scenes all hint at a character who could have added serious tension to the story. But the script largely abandons her there. She has a strong setup with little payoff. She warns Elodie, senses the danger, gives the audience permission to distrust Arya, and then mostly recedes to the edge of the plot. For an actor with Bassett's presence, that feels like a genuine waste. You can practically see a better version of the film every time she's on screen, one where Lady Bobby has real influence and her bond with Elodie is explored in depth. Not just princess versus dragon, but a story about family, doubt, and the adults who fail or fight to protect their children. Instead, Bassett functions largely as an early warning sign, a powerful one, but still just a warning sign. That's unfortunate, because she brings more authority to the part than the writing gives back. In a film built on royal betrayal and fairy tale reversals, Lady Bobby, the stepmother who sees the monster before anyone else does, could have been one of its smartest twists. The film notices the idea. It just doesn't do enough with it. Winstone gives Damsel some early grounding, and the film genuinely needs it. As Lord Bobby, he's not playing a shining fantasy king with perfect posture and poetic speeches. He feels older, worn down, and burdened, a father and ruler acutely aware of his kingdom's failing state. That desperation is written all over him, and Winstone sells it without overplaying it. There's a weariness to the character that fits the role well, a man trying to do right by his people with very limited options, even when the choice he makes puts his daughter directly in harm's way. The film doesn't dig deeply into his guilt, but Winstone conveys enough of the pressure behind the decision to make it land. Nick Robinson's Prince Henry is a different kind of supporting piece. He looks every bit the fairy tale prince, which is really the point. Charming on the surface, soft enough to seem harmless, but with something hollow underneath. It's not a badly acted performance so much as a deliberately hollow character. Henry is a man who's let himself become part of something rotten. He isn't the dragon, and he isn't the mastermind. He's the polished face of the trap. That's what makes him quietly unpleasant. His sin isn't dramatic evil, it's weakness. He knows enough, participates enough, and lets the system continue because it benefits him, which makes his prince persona feel far uglier in hindsight. Brooke Carter, as Elodie's younger sister Floria, provides a softer emotional note, Though the film keeps her fairly simple, mostly that to remind us Elodie has something personal to protect beyond the political marriage, representing family and innocence. The issue across all these supporting roles isn't that the performances are weak, it's that most of the characters exist to serve the plot and then step aside. Lord Bford is the desperate father, Henry is the deceptive prince, Floria is the innocent sister. Each has a clear function but little room to breathe beyond it. Still, they give the film a basic emotional foundation, tying Elodie's ordeal to a family, a kingdom, and a betrayal bigger than one unlucky wedding. You just wish the script had given them more life outside the machinery of the sacrifice. The dragon is the thing Damsel absolutely needs to get right, because once your film markets itself as princess versus dragon, the creature can't feel like an afterthought. It has to carry weight and danger, making the cave feel genuinely inescapable. For the most part, it delivers. This isn't a cute or friendly fantasy creature from the moment Elodie encounters it. It moves like it owns the mountain, like every tunnel and shadow belongs to it. The instant she's thrown down there, the film transforms. Palace politics vanish, royal smiles disappear, and the story becomes direct. Survive the thing hunting you. What makes the dragon more compelling is that she isn't just a winged monster. She has a grievance, a memory, a reason to hate the people above her, which gives her presence more bite than a standard creature feature villain. She's genuinely frightening, but she's also carrying damage from long before Elodie ever arrived, which complicates the conflict. Elodie is being punished for a royal crime she had no part in. That's where the dragon becomes one of the film's stronger elements, both threat and victim, predator and wounded survivor. The movie doesn't explore the duality as deeply as it could, but the idea alone gives the cave sequences added meaning. Every time she speaks or stalks Elodie through the dark, it doesn't feel like random violence. It feels like grief that's calcified into ritual. Visually, she commands the screen. Her face, her fire, the way she fills the frame, and when the effects land, she feels ancient, enormous, and furious in ways the human villains never quite achieve. Queen Isabel may orchestrate the sacrifices, but the dragon is the force that turns the lie into something physical and real, the nightmare lurking beneath the fairy tale. Without her, Damsel would just be another story about corrupt royalty and a betrayed princess. With her, it becomes something more primal, a young woman trapped in darkness with a creature that has every reason to burn the world, even while burning the wrong person. What makes Elodie's decision a little more compelling is that she isn't some naive girl chasing a fairy tale wedding. Her kingdom is in genuine trouble, cold, broke, and on the brink of collapse. This isn't a family chasing luxury, it's one staring down starvation and looking for any door that still opens. So when Oria's offer arrives, it doesn't feel like romance, it feels like a rescue package. That context matters, because Elodie's choice carries real weight. She isn't dazzled by a handsome prince and a nicer palace. She understands what her people need, and so does her father. Lord Bford may not grasp the full horror behind Oria's offer, but he understands desperation, and desperation has a way of making terrible deals look reasonable. That's one of Damsel's stronger ideas. The marriage is political before it's personal. Elodie's value lies in her name and status, tradable for her family's survival. Dressed up in ceremony, music, and royal smiles, but underneath, it's still a transaction. That framing makes the betrayal sting more, because Elodie isn't walking into this for selfish reasons. She believes she's doing something noble, maybe even mature, sacrificing her future to save people back home. There's a quiet sadness in that, even if the film doesn't dig into it as deeply as it could. The bitter irony is that Oria is running the same kind of calculation, just in a far uglier form. Elodie's kingdom sees the marriage as protection for its people. Oria sees Elodie herself as payment. One side is desperate for survival, the other preserves its comfort through sacrifice. Long before the dragon ever appears, the film is already a story about hunger, power, and the lengths kingdoms will go to when survival is on the line. The fantasy trappings make it look like a fairy tale, but the deal at its center is cold, political, and rotten to the core. The kingdom of Oria looks exactly the way suspicious places always look in fantasy movies, impossibly polished. The palace is grand, the clothing immaculate, the royal family fluent in exactly the right smiles at exactly the right moments, making the whole arrangement feel blessed by tradition. On the surface, it's everything Elodie's struggling kingdom isn't: rich, warm, elegant, almost too perfect to be real. But the film doesn't bury its warning signs very deep. Robin Wright's Queen Isabel carries herself with a calm regality where every polite sentence seems to hide a blade underneath. She doesn't welcome Elodie so much as inspect her, like a long-awaited shipment finally arriving, a less future mother-in-law. More overseer confirming a transaction is proceeding smoothly. Prince Henry isn't much more reassuring. He has the face of a storybook prince, and the film leans into that effectively: a handsome, soft-spoken, easy to like at first glance, but there's something hollow about him, not villainous exactly, just weak and too comfortable inside a system clearly hiding secrets. The kind of prince who smiles while everyone else decides what kind of monster he's willing to become. That's what makes Oria feel genuinely dangerous. That isn't chaotic or obviously cruel at first. It's worse: organized, civilized, ceremonial. These people have committed atrocities for so long that they've wrapped it in ritual and convinced themselves it's normal. You can understand why Elodie might want to believe in it, given how desperate her own home is. But from the audience's side, we're already watching too closely. The smiles linger a beat too long, the traditions feel a little too rehearsed, and the Queen's kindness has no warmth behind it. That unease gives the film some real tension even before the dragon shows up, because the true monster isn't only waiting under the mountain, a part of it is sitting at the royal table, dressed in jewels, pretending this wedding is anything but a trap. Then there's Lady Bfote, Elodie's stepmother, played by Angela Bassett, who stands out in a genuinely surprising way. She's not a wicked stepmother archetype at all. In fact, she's one of the only people who senses the trap before anyone else. She notices the cracks in Oria's polished facade, questions Isabel's charm, and tries to warn Elodie that something is wrong, her frustration simmering beneath the royal etiquette. The film does a solid job establishing her as protective and perceptive rather than a background figure, but the script never gives her much to do beyond raising the alarm. She warns her stepdaughter, then largely fades into the background. You keep waiting for her to actively shape events, but she mostly exists to signal to the audience that something's off. It's a missed opportunity. Bassett clearly has the presence to do far more, the kind of commanding energy that could have electrified the royal court scenes. Instead, we get glimpses of her potential and the sense that a stronger secondary character went underused. Still, her warnings add a grounding note of reality amid the glossy palace scenes, reminding us that not every adult in this world is complicit, and it helps frame Elodie's choices as not naive, but cautiously trusting despite the warning signs. Then comes the wedding, a lesser romantic milestone in Damsel than watching someone unknowingly sign their own death warrant in a very expensive dress. It's the nasty turn the film has been building toward. Elodie believes she's marrying Henry, her family believes the alliance will save their kingdom. Everyone smiles through the ancient pageantry where no one says what they actually mean. But Oria isn't welcoming a bride, it's preparing an offering. The ritual itself is where the fairy tale surface truly cracks. The blood, the vows, the old customs, the long walk up the mountain, all engineered to make murder look dignified. What's unsettling is how calm and practiced everyone is about it, treating cruelty like just another royal obligation, preserving the kingdom's comfort. And then Elodie is thrown, and no dramatic rescue, no prince having second thoughts, just gravity and the horrifying realization that the entire marriage was a trap from the start. It's arguably the cleanest expression of what Damsel is trying to be, taking the wedding fantasy as a dress, the prince, the promise of a better life and turning it brutal. Elodie's value to Arya was never about who she was as a person, she was payment. A body dropped into darkness to keep an ancient bargain alive. The dragon sacrifice gives the story its sharper edge, transforming royal tradition into something monstrous. The kingdom's prosperity runs on repetition. Find a bride, perform the ritual, discard her, call it necessary, and what makes it worse is how utterly normal it's become to them. They've dressed horror in ceremony for so long that no one in power even flinches anymore. For Elodie, that fall isn't just physical, it's the moment the fairy tale dies. From there, the film finally delivers on what it's been promising. One young woman trapped underground, realizing the people above never intended to save her, because they were the ones who fed her to the monster. The dragon isn't just there because the movie needed a cool monster, there's real history behind her, and an ugly one. As Elodie starts piecing together the truth about Arya, the sacrifice ritual stops looking like a random curse and starts looking like a kingdom burying its own crimes. Years earlier, the royal family committed an unforgivable act against the dragon's bloodline, her children, her eggs, and rather than face the consequences themselves, they built a tradition around passing that punishment on to innocent girls. Arya presents itself as noble and refined, but its entire prosperity rests on a lie. The royals committed the original sin, and every generation since has fed someone else into the fallout rather than take responsibility themselves. They dress up outsiders as brides, mix blood through ritual, and drop them into the dark as if that somehow balances the scales. A cowardice dressed up as heritage. That's what makes the dragon more compelling than a simple fire-breathing threat. She's genuinely terrifying, moving through those caves. She feels like death with wings, but she isn't evil for evil's sake. Her rage has a source, her cruelty comes from pain. That doesn't excuse her, but it does make her memorable. She isn't hunting Elodie because monsters hunt princesses, she's hunting because Arya taught her that royal blood deserves to burn. The real tragedy is that Elodie isn't guilty of anything. She's been dragged into someone else's ancient debt, blamed for a betrayal she had no part in, trapped inside a cycle of revenge that predates her by generations. That gives the story its sharpest edge. The true villain isn't only the dragon in the cave, but the royal machine above it, the people who know the truth and keep the ritual alive by calling it tradition. It's one of Damsel's stronger ideas. It gives the monster a wound, the kingdom a stain, and Elodie a reason to do more than merely survive, because once she learns the truth, escaping stops being enough. The cycle has to end. One of the more interesting details in the cave is the graffiti left behind by the girls who came before Elodie, and honestly, I wish the film had leaned into it further, because once she's down there, the cave stops feeling like a monster's den and starts feeling like a graveyard with handwriting on the walls. Every scratched warning is proof that this has happened again and again, not legends, but real girls who understood, with just enough time left, exactly how badly they'd been betrayed. It's quietly unsettling rather than loudly horrifying. Elodie is walking through the final thoughts of women who lived through the same nightmare she's living now. Some of the messages guide her, some help her piece together the truth, and some feel like desperate attempts to leave proof behind. We were here, this happened, don't let them erase us. That gives the cave a bit more personality than just rock and bone and fire. At the same time, the way the film uses this graffiti can feel a little convenient. Exposition literally carved into stone. Need Elodie to understand the ritual? There's a clue. Need her to know where others went? There's a marking. It works, but you can feel the storytelling shortcut, almost hear the script saying, okay, she has to learn this somehow. Still, it's a strong idea in a movie about a kingdom treating young women as disposable. Those wall markings are the only voice the victims have left. The royals above have their ceremonies and their official history down below. The truth is scratched into stone by the people they tried to erase. And for Elodie, that matters. She isn't just fleeing a dragon anymore. She's following the trail left by every princess who didn't make it out. That gives her survival extra weight. It's not only about escaping the cave, but about becoming the one victim who finally reads the warning, understands the pattern, and refuses to become just another name lost in the rock. The title Damsel is doing a lot of heavy lifting, because the entire film is built around dismantling that old fairy tale image: a princess in danger, dragon nearby, prince riding to the rescue, sword raised, music swelling, problem solved. This movie looks at that formula and says, essentially, she's on her own. That's probably the cleanest idea in the film. Elodie is placed squarely in the classic damsel in distress role: dressed for a wedding, handed over through royal politics, betrayed by a prince, and dropped into a dragon's lair like just another helpless offering. Everything around her is engineered to make her powerless: the dress, the ceremony, the family bargain, the cave, the monster. But she doesn't stay there, and that's where the film finds its energy. Elodie is scared, obviously, anyone would be, but fear doesn't paralyze her for long. She starts thinking, crawling, cutting, climbing, using whatever's around her. She doesn't suddenly become invincible, which helps. She survives because she's stubborn, angry, and quick to learn from the girls who came before her. The film isn't subtle about its subversion. This is very much a modern fairy tale where the princess saves herself, and sometimes that message is underlined a bit too heavily, in places where letting the action speak for itself would have been stronger. But when it works, because the best part of Elodie's arc isn't that she becomes a flawless warrior overnight, it's that the world expected her to be disposable, and she refuses to be. The royals think they know the story, the dragon thinks she knows the story, even the audience thinks they know the story. Then Elodie starts rewriting it down: no prince, no rescue, no tidy fairy tale ending handed to her. Just a so-called damsel dragging herself through fire and stone until the word stops meaning weakness. Elodie's journey is really what the entire film hinges on. At the start, she's not introduced as some fearless warrior waiting for her big action moment. She's a daughter trying to do right by her family and her people. Her kingdom is suffering, her father is desperate, and she understands that this marriage could mean survival for everyone back home. So she agrees, and that detail matters, because it makes her feel less like a fantasy archetype and more like someone bound by responsibility. She isn't dazzled into warrior by a prince. She's making a choice that feels noble at the time, even if it isn't romantic or ideal. Then the movie strips that choice away from her. Once she's thrown into the cave, everything that defined her, the dress, the title, the royal manners, becomes useless. Nobody down there cares that she's a princess, not the dragon, not the cave, not the dead girls whose belongings proved that status meant nothing to any of them either. That's where her real transformation begins. She has to get practical fast, repurposing her dress, reading the cave's warnings, managing her fear, and continuing to move even while injured. The film is at its best when it lets us watch the change happen physically. Elodie gets dirtier, bloodier, more exhausted, and somehow more focused. She doesn't become a hero through speeches, she becomes one because survival demands it. There's something satisfying in that, not because the writing gives her enormous emotional depth, it doesn't always, but because the circumstances themselves force her growth. She goes from being a political pawn to someone who sees the entire rotten system clearly, and by the end she isn't just trying to escape anymore, she wants to break the cycle for good. That's the stronger version of her arc, not simply princess becomes warrior, but victim understands the machine that made her a victim, and decides she'll be the last one. The film sometimes handles that message a bit loudly, but the underlying shape of the journey still works. Elodie begins the story as a devoted daughter willing to sacrifice her future for her kingdom, and ends it as someone who's looked at tradition, royalty, and fire in the face and decided she's done being anyone's offering. One of Damsel's smarter choices is giving the dragon a voice that genuinely feels ancient. Shohreh Aghdashloo doesn't just voice a monster, she gives it texture, a gravelly, wounded, almost hypnotic quality that makes the creature feel older than the kingdom itself. From her first line, it's clear this isn't just a beast lurking in a cave waiting for the next unlucky bride. There's intelligence, bitterness, and memory in every word. That matters, because a talking dragon is a genuine risk handled poorly. It could have tipped the whole film into silliness and drained its tension the moment the creature opened its mouth. Instead, Aghdashloo's performance keeps the danger intact. She sounds calm in a way that's almost worse than roaring, as if the dragon already knows Elodie's fate and is simply circling the moment. There's anger in her delivery, but it's not cartoonish, it feels personal, with grief threaded beneath the cruelty, giving the character an unexpected dignity. She's terrifying, but not empty. She's been wronged, and the voice carries that pain like smoke trapped in the lungs. Honestly, the dragon's voice does a lot of heavy lifting the script itself doesn't always manage. It gives the mythology weight and makes the cave sequences feel less like a straightforward chase and more like Elodie has stumbled into the home of something furious, intelligent, and deeply scarred. Every line sounds like it's coming from a creature that's waited too long, hurt too long, and has no interest left in mercy. Some viewers might find the voice a bit theatrical or recognizable, and that's fair. It's a very distinctive sound, but for me, that distinctiveness works in the film's favor. In a fantasy movie that can feel generic elsewhere, the dragon's voice gives it real personality. It isn't just the fire that makes her memorable, it's that voice, rough, elegant, bitter, dangerous, turning her from a CGI obstacle into the one character who genuinely feels like she's been carrying centuries of rage. The dragon's visual design also does a lot to sell the film. This isn't a flat, generic CGI creature. When she fills the frame, you feel her scale, her weight, the way she moves through the cave, making the environment feel alive and dangerous. The design team clearly put real thought into her face and expressions, right down to how she tilts her head or flicks her tail, giving her the presence of an intelligent predator rather than just a fire-breathing obstacle. The fire effects hold up well too, hot and threatening rather than video game flashy, and the way light and shadow play across her scales makes the cave feel genuinely claustrophobic. Every rock and stalagmite a potential hiding place for danger. There are moments where her mere presence is enough to raise the tension, which is exactly what a film like this needs. That said, the CGI isn't flawless, as some shots look a little stiff or overly polished, and the way her wings move or she lands doesn't always match the weight you'd expect. But even with those minor inconsistencies, the overall effect works. She dominates the screen and gives the film its central visual punch. A dragon is only as scary as it feels real, and Damsel largely understands that. Whenever she's on screen, you know Elodie is in serious danger. She isn't just something to look at, she's a living, thinking, vengeful force, which is exactly what makes the cave sequences and survival beats work. Even when the writing around them gets clunky. She's big, she's frightening, and she owns every scene she's in, and that's precisely what the film needed from its main antagonist. Once Elodie hits the cave, Damsel shifts fully into survival mode, and that's where it finds its heartbeat. This isn't a princess waiting for a knight, it's a young woman thrown into darkness with fire, jagged rocks, and a dragon determined to roast her. Every movement carries stakes, every misstep could be fatal. It's physical and exhausting, and the tension feels earned because the film takes the time to make her danger believable. Its simplicity is what makes it work. There aren't endless twists or convoluted schemes. Just, stay alive, watch the dragon, avoid getting cornered, find a way out. Watching Brown navigate that is genuinely compelling. She crawls, climbs, hides, and improvises in ways that feel plausible, scared but resourceful. There's a real rhythm to these scenes too. The cave itself becomes a character, all narrow tunnels, stalagmites, smoke, and the smell of fire, and you feel trapped right alongside Elodie. This survival element gives the film an energy the polished palace scenes never managed. Suddenly the stakes are crystal clear and the audience has real skin in the game. It isn't perfect as some sequences drag, and the tension occasionally slips into repetition, but there's enough danger and inventiveness to keep you engaged. The dragon isn't a static threat. She stalks, watches, reacts, and that push and pull generates small bursts of suspense that make you lean in. This is where the film earns its keep. All the politics, ceremony, and exposition fall away, leaving just Elodie against the mountain, the dark, and the dragon. When it clicks, and it often does, it's genuinely gripping. Once the film settles fully into the cave, it essentially becomes an extended cat-and-mouse chase, and this is where Damsel lives or dies. Elodie is constantly on the move, ducking, hiding, running, occasionally just trying to catch her breath while a dragon hunts her through narrow tunnels and shadowed chambers. It's survival thrills at their purest, simple, relentless, tense. You feel the stakes in every creaking rock and flicker of firelight. These sequences build a real rhythm. One moment she's pressed flat against stone, listening to heavy footsteps echo through the caverns. The next, she's scrambling over rubble or using whatever's nearby to stay a step ahead. The cave starts to feel like a living thing, twisting and closing in around her, shaping the chase as much as the dragon does. That's the strength of these scenes. They make every movement and choice matter, giving the audience a reason to lean in even when the dialogue falls flat elsewhere. You're watching Elodie think and improvise and survive in real time. It's not without flaws, though. After a while, the pattern of hide, crawl, escape, repeat can bleed some tension away, stretching the chase longer than it probably needed to be, to the point where you catch yourself thinking, okay, we get it, as she's being hunted. Still, even with that repetition, the cave sequences are the emotional core of the film. They make the danger feel immediate, give Brown room to self-fear and determination, and establish the dragon as a genuinely formidable opponent. In a movie that can be predictable elsewhere, these scenes deliver suspense you can actually feel. The action in Damsel is a mixed bag overall, but it's one of the elements that keeps the film moving. It's not over-choreographed or flashy in a Marvel sense. Most of it is grounded in Elodie running, climbing, and trying to survive while a dragon tries to roast her. Those moments feel immediate and almost claustrophobic thanks to the cave setting. You feel every scrape and stumble, every panicked leap. Brown sells the physicality convincingly enough that even simple movements carry tension, and there are some creative touches sprinkled throughout. Elodie improvising with her surroundings, navigating tight tunnels, dodging fire, turning the environment against the dragon. The stakes stay clear, one wrong move and it's over, and that simplicity makes the action easy to follow and invest in, with every second feeling like it counts. It's not seamless, though, as some sequences drag or repeat similar beats, and pacing occasionally makes the action feel stretched to fill runtime. A few of the dragon's attacks look slightly off visually, and the smaller skirmishes can feel underwhelming compared to the bigger set pieces. Still, on the whole, the action does what it needs to. It keeps the audience engaged, gives Elodie believable challenges, and makes the survival stakes feel real. The film's biggest victories in these scenes come from tension, improvisation, and sheer determination rather than spectacle, which actually suits a story like this. It's less about over-the-top battles and more about watching a princess claw her way through chaos, and those moments genuinely land. The moments where Damsel edges closest to horror are honestly some of its best. Not full horror, this is still a fantasy adventure and never fully commits to that register, but every so often the film remembers that being trapped underground with a dragon should feel awful rather than heroic. There are scenes of Elodie crawling through tight spaces, scraping against stone, barely able to move, and that's where the film becomes genuinely effective. You feel the cave pressing in, the lack of air, how easily panic could take over when there's no room to fight or run or even turn around. That kind of tension outperforms some of the bigger action beats. A fire-breathing dragon is exciting, sure, but a person stuck in a narrow tunnel with danger somewhere behind her is the stuff that actually tightens your shoulders. It's simple. Primal fear, the kind where you stop thinking about plot and just think, please get out of there. I wish the film had leaned into that harder. The cave should feel like a nightmare, dirty, suffocating, ancient, dangerous in every direction, and sometimes it does. There are flashes where Damsel edges into survival horror territory, where the fantasy elements fade and you're simply watching someone trapped somewhere designed to kill her. But the film keeps pulling back into adventure mode, keeping the gore restrained and the fear present but never fully unleashed. Still, those claustrophobic scenes leave an impression, reminding you that Elodie isn't just fighting a dragon, she's fighting the mountain itself, the darkness, the narrow passages, the silence, the heat, the old bones, the sense that every exit might be another trap. When Damsel commits to that, even briefly, it becomes a noticeably sharper film. What I appreciate about Damsel is that it doesn't linger for long on its soft, magical surface. At first, it has all the expected ingredients: a princess, a royal proposal, a wealthy kingdom, a handsome prince, grand castles, elegant halls, are the shape of a story you already know. But underneath the gold rim, the film is actually pretty grim. This is a world where kingdoms solve their problems by sacrificing girls, where tradition is just a nicer word for murder, where a wedding dress can become a burial garment before the bride even realizes it. That darker edge is what Damsel keeps circling back to, and it's much more interesting whenever it commits to it. The fantasy here isn't all wonder and adventure, it's betrayal, blood rituals, old vengeance, royal cowardice, and a dragon living under a mountain carrying centuries of rage. There's something genuinely nasty about the idea that Arya built its beautiful kingdom on something this ugly. The palace looks pristine, but morally it's rotten through and through. The cave is where the dark fantasy tone really settles in. Once Elodie is thrown underground, the story sheds its polished fairy tale exterior in favor of stone, fire, bones, and desperate scratches on the walls left by girls sent down before her. It's not just a dragon's lair, it's a monument to failed escapes and buried truths. To its credit, the movie doesn't go as dark as it could. There's a version of Damsel that tips almost fully into horror, something nastier and more haunting, but this version stays more accessible, more adventure-driven, more young adult in feel. It wants danger without going too far, brutality without fully disturbing its audience. Still, that dark fantasy flavor is what gives the film its personality. Without it, Damsel would just be another princess adventure. With it, there's at least some bite. The movie understands that fairy tales weren't always tidy children's stories. Sometimes they were warnings about hunger, punishment, monsters, and the terrible bargains families make. That's the best version of Damsel. Not the glossy Netflix polish, but the cruel little fairy tale underneath, where the castle is the trap, the prince is part of the lie, and the dragon might not be the only monster in the kingdom. For all its talk of dragons, sacrifice, betrayal, and royal blood rituals, Damsel still feels very much like a young adult fantasy at heart, and that's not automatically a bad thing. The film has genuinely dark ingredients. Elodie is thrown into a cave to die. The dragon isn't cute, the kingdom's secret is legitimately cruel, and there are past victims, brutal moments, and real danger throughout. But it never crosses into truly disturbing territory. It doesn't push the violence into full horror, and it doesn't dwell too long in the ugliness of its own premise. It stays accessible, which is probably why it works best as a teen-friendly fantasy adventure. Dangerous, but not overwhelming, led by a strong, easy-to-root for heroine featuring a genuinely scary dragon, but with enough polish to avoid feeling too grim. Younger viewers especially will likely connect with the direct emotional appeal. An underestimated girl, exploited by a powerful system, expected to die quietly, instead learns, adapts, fights back, and refuses to be part of the pattern. It's not subtle, but it's easy to root for. At the same time, that sensibility is also why the film sometimes feels lighter than its own premise suggests. You can sense a darker, harsher version of Damsel hiding just beneath the surface, one that leans further into horror, grief, and the tragedy of all those sacrificed girls. But this version keeps pulling back, chasing the thrill of danger without becoming too heavy, empowerment without too much emotional complication, dark fantasy packaged for a broad, comfortable audience. So Damsel lands in a middle space, too dark for a cozy fairy tale, but too restrained to be a truly brutal fantasy horror story. It's scary enough for younger viewers to feel the stakes without shutting them out entirely, and for a Netflix fantasy adventure built around a modern heroine and a dragon with a clear survival arc, that tone mostly makes sense. It may not deepen the story much, but it does define its audience. One of the more obvious things about Damsel is how openly it wears its feminist themes. This is a film where the woman doesn't wait around for a hero, she is the hero. The entire premise, a princess thrown into a dragon's lair with no one coming to save her, sets up empowerment from the moment she hits the cave floor. Every obstacle is hers to handle. And the film makes that abundantly clear. Elodie's transformation sits at the center of that message. She starts as a devoted princess trying to save her kingdom and ends the film actively reshaping her own fate, outsmarting the dragon, surviving the royal family's trap, and refusing to be another sacrificial pawn. The film is explicit about her intelligence and agency, which is a welcome departure from genre conventions that often lean on male rescuers. That said, the feminist angle isn't always subtle. The film occasionally underlines it a bit too heavily, hitting you over the head with "look at her being a strong woman" moments rather than letting the story and action speak for themselves. You can feel the intention, which is admirable, but it sometimes overshadows nuance. Even so, it works for the audience. The film seems to be targeting there's a clear sense of triumph in watching her succeed without needing anyone else to save her, and that energy carries the film through some of its more predictable or clunkier stretches. Ultimately, the feminist thread is central to Damsel's identity. It isn't subtle or groundbreaking, but it's consistent. And for viewers who want a heroine who drives the action and refuses to be silenced or sacrificed, the film delivers exactly that: a straightforward, unapologetic celebration of a young woman taking control of her own story. One of the quieter threads running through Damsel involves family, duty, and sacrifice, and it's actually more interesting than you might expect. Elodie isn't fighting only for herself, she's carrying the weight of her kingdom, her family, and the people depending on her father's choices. The marriage to Henry isn't romantic, it's a calculated move to keep her people alive. And the film makes clear from the outset that duty here isn't optional. She steps into danger not for glory, but because someone has to. Meanwhile, the royal family of Orient embodies the darker side of sacrifice. Their prosperity is built on generations of offering up young women, maintained purely because it's convenient. That contrast between Elodie's selfless sense of duty and Oria's cold, transactional cruelty gives the story a bit of moral weight. This isn't just a monster under a mountain, but centuries of people making terrible choices in the name of survival or power. Even the smaller family dynamics matter here. Lady Bfode's warnings, Floria's innocence, Lord Bfode's worry, all giving Elodie motivation beyond pure survival, helping explain why she keeps fighting and why the stakes feel bigger than one life or death cave ordeal. This theme hits hardest once the cave sequences begin. Every step reminds Elodie that other girls didn't make it out, that Oria's comfort has always come at someone else's expense. Yet the film frames her actions as reclaiming that sacrifice, not just for herself, but for everyone who came before her. Damsel doesn't handle these ideas with much subtlety, but they give the story real teeth, elevating it beyond a simple dragon chase into a tale about loyalty, responsibility, and choosing to fight even when the system you were born into wants you to fail. In an otherwise fairly straightforward film, these themes help make Elodie's journey feel bigger than mere survival. If there's one area where Damsel really struggles, it's the writing, specifically the dialogue. A lot of the lines feel stiff or forced, with characters speaking in ways that sound like exposition rather than natural conversation. You can practically see the script checking boxes: explain the ritual, remind the audience of past sacrifices, build tension, sometimes all in the same breath. Occasionally it lands, often it just makes you wince. There's also a real predictability to how the story unfolds. The setup, the betrayal, the warnings, the chase beats you've seen before, and the dialogue rarely does much to freshen them up. Even sharper or more sarcastic lines from Elodie can feel undercut by how straightforward the surrounding scene is. It's not just word choice. Either pacing suffers too. There are stretches where characters explain things the audience already understands, slowing the momentum, and moments that should feel urgent get bogged down by dialogue that's overly formal or dragging. That said, the writing isn't a total failure. It gives Elodie enough room to shine during her action and survival beats, and a handful of lines genuinely land, particularly when she's improvising in the cave. But compared to how effective the visuals, action, and even the dragon are, the dialogue often feels like the film's weakest link. The deeper you dig into Damsel's plot mechanics, the shakier some of them get. To be clear, not every dragon movie needs airtight logic. This is fantasy, complete with a talking dragon under a mountain, and at some point you accept the world's rules and move forward. But even fantasy needs internal consistency, and there are small details that keep nagging. The way certain tools and weapons appear and disappear from the story. For instance, the film draws attention to objects like a knife or an axe, various survival items, and cave markings, but doesn't always follow through on them satisfyingly. Sometimes you're left waiting for something to matter more than it does other times. A useful item shows up in a way that feels more convenient than earned. Then there's the cave itself. Elodie finds clues from past victims, markings, warnings, almost as if the cave has become a tragic message board for murdered princesses. It's a strong idea emotionally, but practically it raises questions. Who had time to write all this? How far did they get before they died? Why are some clues so conveniently helpful? It's not enough to derail the film, but it's noticeable. The dragon's internal logic has a few soft spots too. If she's powerful enough to threaten the entire kingdom, why does she tolerate this ritual for so long instead of attacking the castle directly? Why keep playing by rules set by the same family that betrayed her? And there's the age-old fantasy question of whether a fire-breathing dragon should be vulnerable to fire at all. Maybe the film wants us to simply go along with fairy tale logic, but the script doesn't always smooth over these gaps. The bigger issue is that these questions tend to surface during scenes meant to be purely tense, pulling part of your attention away from Elodie's survival to wonder how the ritual actually works. How many girls have gone through this? Why no one has exposed it? How Arya has kept the whole system running without it collapsing? That's where another writing pass would have helped, not to over-explain everything, which would be worse, but to tighten the rules, sharpen the setup, and make the survival beats feel less reliant on convenience. Damsel has a genuinely strong concept. A princess thrown into a dragon's lair as part of a royal sacrifice is simple, dark, and immediately engaging, but when the small logical cracks start showing, the spell weakens a little. You can still enjoy the ride, root for Elodie, and appreciate the dragon and the cave's atmosphere, but the film works best when you don't scrutinize the details too closely, because if you do, some of them start breathing fire right back at the script. One thing you notice repeatedly while watching Damsel is how often the story leans on convenience to keep things moving. Elodie's survival is mostly believable. She's smart, quick, and resourceful, but the script occasionally makes it feel a little too easy. Objects appear exactly when she needs them, clues line up neatly, and the cave seems to guide her precisely where she needs to go. It doesn't derail attention, but it's noticeable. You catch yourself thinking, really, that just happens to be there? Even some of the dragon encounters occasionally feel engineered for spectacle rather than genuine challenge, with distractions and escapes that read as scripted rather than organic. The film wants you focused on Elodie's ingenuity, and mostly that works. But the convenience does undercut the stakes here and there. This is a common trait in fantasy adventure films. A reality bends a bit to hit the story's beat, but it's especially noticeable here because Elodie is carrying the entire film. Every successful improvisation is thrilling, but there's a nagging thought underneath: did the cave really line up this neatly? Or is the story simply handing her the tools she needs? That said, the convenience isn't constant. There are moments where Elodie genuinely has to fight, climb, or think her way through danger without easy answers, and those are the scenes that stick, feeling earned rather than lucky. So yes, the film leans on some convenient setups, but it also delivers enough real tension and clever problem solving to make those moments forgivable. One thing you can't really argue around with Damsel is how predictable it is. From the moment Elodie agrees to marry Henry, you already suspect the wedding won't be the fairy tale ending it's dressed up as. You can see the trap forming before she does, thanks to the palace, the queen, and the overly polite smiles that all signal something rotten beneath the surface. Once she reaches the cave, many of the sequences follow beats familiar from survival and monster stories: hide, run, improvise, nearly get caught, barely escape, repeat. The dragon herself, while visually striking, doesn't deliver any truly shocking surprises. You can usually anticipate her attacks and Elodie's escapes. That predictability isn't necessarily fatal, though it can actually be part of the appeal if you're along for the ride, watching Elodie navigate familiar traps while appreciating how she handles them, with the pleasure coming from rooting for her success rather than being surprised by the plot. The real issue arises when the film leans too heavily on those predictable beats without giving the characters or situations enough depth to feel fresh. Some of the dialogue, plot turns, and even the ritual setup are visible from a mile away, which softens tension in places. Even so, predictable doesn't mean boring. Thanks to Millie Bobby Brown's energy, the genuine survival stakes, and the dragon's presence, the film stays engaging. You know the beats coming, but you still want to see how Elodie handles them, and that's what carries Damsel through its more obvious stretches. The biggest issue with Damsel isn't that the idea is bad. Actually, it's a solid one. A princess is offered a royal marriage, discovers she's been tricked into becoming a sacrifice, and has to survive a dragon instead of waiting for a heroic prince. On paper, that's a fun twist on the old fairy tale formula, and for a while, it plays that way. But the longer the film runs, the more it feels assembled from familiar pieces rather than stolen wholesale: the arranged royal marriage, the secretly evil kingdom, the suspicious queen, the weak prince, the ancient curse, the vengeful dragon, the girl who turns out tougher than expected, the dark cave full of past victims and hidden truths. If you've seen enough fantasy, you can practically feel each piece click into place before the film gets there. That's where Damsel starts to feel a little too safe. It wants to function as a subversion, but the subversion itself has become a familiar trope. The princess saves herself idea is still satisfying, but it isn't automatically fresh just because the prince is useless and the heroine gets dirty. Modern fantasy has covered this kind of anti-princess story fairly extensively already. The film needed something sharper: a richer mythology, deeper characters, a more surprising relationship with the dragon, something to make the world feel less like a remix. Instead, it mostly plays out exactly as expected. That doesn't make it boring throughout. The dragon helps. Brown helps. And some of the cave survival material has enough grit to keep it alive, but the story rarely surprises you in a way that makes you sit up and think, I didn't see that coming. It's more, yeah, that tracks say that's probably where this was always headed. For a lot of viewers, that familiarity is exactly enough. Sometimes you just want castles, betrayal, fire, and a heroine fighting back, and that's fair. But in terms of originality, Damsel doesn't really breathe new fire into the genre. It takes a classic fairy tale setup, gives it a modern survival twist, and delivers it with polish. Enjoyable, at times fresh. Not really. The funny thing about Damsel is that even though it's technically an original story, you spend much of the runtime thinking about other films, not always in a bad way, but it's hard to avoid. The most obvious touchstone is the classic princess and dragon tradition. You can feel the shadow of older sword and sorcery fantasy hanging over the whole thing. A kingdom, a beast, a sacrifice, a young hero thrown into a deadly myth. The twist here is that the hero isn't a knight but the princess herself, which gives the film its modern spin. Then there's the dragon itself. Any major cinematic dragon these days invites comparisons to Game of Thrones. And Damsel doesn't fully escape that shadow. The creature has real scale, fire, and menace, but because audiences have already seen so many impressive screen dragons, the film has to work harder to make its version feel distinct. Thankfully, the voice work and emotional backstory help carry that weight. The survival angle brings in different comparisons entirely. Once Elodie is trapped underground, the film starts feeling less like a fairy tale and more like a creature thriller, with shades of Alien in the way she's hunted through enclosed spaces by something far stronger than her, and the royal betrayal premise: a young woman brought into a wealthy family only to discover she's part of a ritualistic nightmare. Carries a bit of Ready or Not in its bones, though that film had a sharper sense of humor. Damsel plays things more straight-faced, sometimes too much so. You can also spot traces of Snow White and the Huntsman and even Narnia in the background. A rebellious or underestimated young woman, a fantasy kingdom that looks polished but hides rotten secrets, a story chasing the feel of a fairy tale with more dirt, fire, and action. It's all familiar territory, and that's the tricky part. These echoes make Damsel easy to understand, but they also expose its limitations. It borrows the survival tension of a monster movie, the royal cruelty of a dark fairy tale, the heroine arc of a modern empowerment fantasy, and the dragon mythology of older fantasy epics, without always blending those influences into something fully its own. That said, those influences don't ruin the experience. They give the film a kind of comfort food quality for fantasy fans. You know the ingredients, you know the rhythm, you know the betrayal is coming, the monster is waiting, and the heroine has to become tougher than the story initially expected of her. Damsel may not escape the shadow of better, more memorable films, but it does borrow from the right shelf. It just needed a bit more personality, wit, and danger to stand confidently beside them instead of constantly reminding us of them. There's a very specific feeling certain Netflix originals carry, and Damsel absolutely has it. The film looks expensive enough that you can't call it cheap, but it still has that faintly packaged quality: a recognizable star, a strong one-line premise, a fantasy setting, glossy visuals, and a plot that moves quickly enough to hold your attention without always feeling like you've discovered something special. That's Damsel in a nutshell. It has polish. The castles look good, the costumes look good, the dragon gets the attention it deserves, and Brown is front and center doing the heavy lifting. On the surface, everything's there. It's the kind of film that appears on your Netflix homepage and immediately makes sense. Princess, dragon, betrayal, survival, done. You already understand its appeal. But that's also part of the problem. There are moments where the film feels less like a bold fantasy adventure and more like a product assembled from safe, reliable ingredients. Just enough darkness to seem edgy, just enough empowerment to feel modern, just enough action to stay marketable, just enough star power to get people to press play. None of that is inherently bad. Movies are allowed to be accessible, but the calculation is occasionally visible. Sometimes you want something that looks good, moves at a solid pace, and gives you a strong lead fighting a giant monster, and Damsel understands that part of its job well. It knows the appeal of its premise, and even when the writing gets clunky or the plot turns predictable, there's usually another visual moment or survival beat ready to pull you back in. How much you enjoy it will depend heavily on what you're looking for. If you want originality, sharp dialogue, layered characters, and a fully fresh fantasy world, this may frustrate you as the scenes show. The repetition is noticeable, and the familiarity becomes hard to ignore. But if you can enjoy it simply as a straightforward Netflix fantasy ride, there's real fun to be had. Brown brings energy, the dragon brings presence, the cave sequences bring tension, and the royal betrayal gives the story an easy hook to latch onto. It's the kind of movie you can put on for one evening and get exactly what the poster promises: a princess betrayed, a dragon waiting underground, and someone eventually paying for it. That's not groundbreaking storytelling, but it's a solid enough recipe, and for a film like Damsel, that might be the real win. It won't blow you away or linger long in memory, but while it's playing, there's enough spark to make the fire worth sitting near. Damsel isn't going to land the same way for everyone. Enjoyment here depends almost entirely on what you wanted going in. If you came for dragons, castles, betrayal, and a heroine clawing her way through a fantasy nightmare, there's plenty here to like. It delivers the genre's basic pleasures without demanding much from the viewer. Fantasy fans will likely get the most out of it, and maybe not the hardcore crowd craving deep mythology and fully lived-in political world-building, but anyone who enjoys medieval kingdoms, ancient curses, fire-breathing monsters, royal secrets, and survival adventure will find plenty to enjoy in its look, danger, dragon, and darkly reimagined fairy tale structure. It also works well for viewers drawn to strong female leads. Elodie carries the entire film, and if you like stories where the princess doesn't wait around to be rescued, where she gets dirty, scared, angry, and eventually fights back, this was built with that audience in mind. The empowerment angle isn't subtle, but subtlety usually isn't what people come to this kind of movie for. Sometimes you just want to watch the underestimated girl survive the trap and turn the story against the people who wrote it for her. Younger viewers and fantasy fans in particular may connect with it more than older audiences seeking something heavier. The film has dark ideas but keeps them accessible, intense without tipping into disturbing, violent without becoming horror, dealing in betrayal and death while still moving like an adventure film. That balance makes it easy to recommend as a casual fantasy watch. But if you're chasing originality, Damsel might leave you wanting. If you need sharp writing, rich characters, unpredictable turns, or a fantasy world that digs deep into itself, this one may feel thin. You'll see the plot coming, feel the Netflix polish, and sense the film choosing broad entertainment over deeper storytelling. So the audience for Damsel is fairly clear: dragon enthusiasts, probably yes. Millie Bobby Brown fans, definitely viewers who enjoy dark fairy tales with a modern heroine, sure. People hoping for a bold, genre-defining fantasy classic, probably not. It doesn't win by being brilliant, it wins by being easy to watch. A simple fantasy survival story with enough fire, tension, and attitude to satisfy the right audience for one evening. The strongest thing about Damsel is that it understands the appeal of its own premise: a princess, a fake fairy tale marriage, a corrupt royal family, a cave full of secrets, a dragon waiting in the dark. That's a clean, easily understood setup, and honestly pretty easy to invest in once the film gets moving. Even with shaky writing, the basic idea retains real power. There's something inherently satisfying about watching a character meant to be helpless slowly figure out how to survive a system built to destroy her. Millie Bobby Brown is unquestionably the film's biggest strength. For long stretches, she's carrying the story almost entirely on her own, crawling, running, panicking, fighting, keeping the audience emotionally invested while much of the supporting cast disappears from the action, and she gives the film real energy. She may not fix every weak line, but she makes Elodie's determination feel real enough that you stay invested. Then there's the dragon, probably the single most memorable element of the film. A strong design, a genuinely commanding voice, and a level of menace the human villains never quite match. Whenever she enters a scene, the film wakes up, the fire, the movement, the anger behind the voice, all of it giving Damsel the fantasy weight it needs. The production design deserves credit too. Aria looks rich and suspiciously polished in exactly the right fairy tale way, while the cave gives the film texture and danger. That contrast between the beautiful kingdom above and the ugly truth below is simple but effective, and the visuals do real work in selling the story even when the script isn't pulling its weight. The survival elements land well too. When Elodie is trapped underground, reading the cave, dodging the dragon, and improvising to stay alive, the film becomes noticeably sharper. Those scenes bring real tension and momentum, grounding the familiar princess story in something physical: dirt, stone, blood, fire, breath, fear. So yes, Damsel has its problems, but its strengths are genuine, committed lead, a great central monster, strong fantasy visuals, a clear hook, and enough survival tension to keep the whole thing alive. It's not especially deep or original, but when it's focused on Elodie versus the dragon, the film delivers exactly the kind of simple, fiery entertainment it set out to provide. Where Damsel falls short is mostly in needing sharper writing. The premise itself is strong. A princess tricked into becoming a dragon sacrifices a clean, punchy idea, but the film doesn't always build around it with much imagination. Too much feels familiar. You can see the betrayal coming, the royal family's true nature coming, the empowerment arc coming, and while predictability doesn't automatically sink a fantasy adventure, it does make the film feel safer than it needed to be. The dialogue is another weak point. Much of it is functional rather than memorable, with characters speaking in ways that push the plot along without ever really surprising you. The royal villains sound exactly like royal villains. The warnings sound exactly like warnings. The emotional beats are clear but rarely feel natural. There are moments where the script seems to be working hard to explain the story rather than letting scenes simply breathe.